frost still whitened the north slope when Isabel Renner knelt in the creek gravel and rinsed the last of the sorghum syrup out of a cracked crock. Behind her, the homestead sat low and patient, a soddy with a warped shingle roof, a lean-to shed, 40 acres of hard yellow ground in the Nisqually Fork country of eastern Washington, 1890. Her husband Otto was on the shed roof again, nailing a scrap of tin over the same leak he had covered in February. He did not call down to her. He never called down. Isabel wrung the rag out and thought, as she did most mornings, "We will patch this place until it buries us." Their nearest neighbor, Marta Vig, came up the wagon track that afternoon with a jar of buttermilk and no invitation. "Your roof," Marta said, tipping her chin at the shed. "Otto's been up there 4 times since Christmas. He's careful." "He's alone." Marta set the jar on the stump they used for a table. "Careful and alone are different things, Isabel. My Anders would have come over with the long ladder and a second pair of hands, and it'd be done in a morning. We manage." "You endure." Marta said it without heat, the way she said everything. There's a difference there, too. A thing you carry by yourself gets heavier every year. A thing you carry with somebody gets lighter. Isabel picked up the buttermilk and held it against her chest. "We don't have much to offer back," she said, "so we don't take much." Marta let it go. The Renners had come out from Ohio in 1885 with a wagon, a plow, and $400 from the sale of Otto's father's cooperage. The $400 was gone by the second winter, 60 of it to a well that came in bitter and had to be abandoned, 90 to seed wheat that hailed out. The rest bled away in flour and nails and the long, slow arithmetic of a place that gave back less than it took. What remained was the land itself, 160 acres claimed under the Homestead Act, of which 40 were broken and the rest sagebrush and basalt outcrop. They had 18 months left on the 5-year residency requirement before Otto could file final proof and get his patent. Until then, the land was not theirs. It was a promise the government made to people who could stay. Otto Renner was 34, a cooper by training. He had learned to raise a barrel from staves in his father's shop in Sandusky, how to set a truss hoop, how to steam oak until it took a curve, how to fit a joint so tight that water could not find its way out. It was skilled work, and it had been worth good money once, before machine-made tubs and tin pails ate the trade. Out here, nobody wanted barrels. Out here, they wanted a man who could dig. He had a hand plane, a draw knife, 2 hoop drivers, a froe, an adze, a jointer plane inherited from his father, and a small stock of dry oak he could not bring himself to burn. He also had a fixed idea, unspoken and iron, that a man who took help was a man who had failed. His father had died owing money to a brother-in-law and had spoken of it, ashamed, on his last afternoon. Otto had watched that shame and made a decision at 19 he had never revisited. Isabel was 31. She had been a dyer's daughter in Cincinnati, which meant she had grown up around vats and mordants and the tedious empirical business of making one substance hold on to another. She knew that alum fixed color to wool. She knew that linen took dye differently than cotton because of how the fiber drank. She knew, above all, the rhythm of testing. Small batch, record it, change one thing, test again. Her father had kept a ledger of failures thicker than his ledger of accounts. She had brought that habit west with her and had almost nothing to spend it on. She used it on bread, on soap, on the fine calibration of how much lye to how much rendered fat. It was not enough work for the part of her mind that wanted it. They had no children. There had been one, in 1887, who lived 9 days. Neither of them spoke of it, and both of them thought of it, and the silence had grown a kind of callus over the years, thick enough that they could touch it without flinching, but never thin enough to feel through. Their assets in March 1890: 2 horses, one of them old, 6 hens, a milk cow named Dot who was drying off, $11.40 in a tobacco tin, a debt of $32 at Hallowell's store in Fork Junction, which Marcus Hallowell carried without complaint but did not forget. 6 miles down the Nisqually Fork sat the Cascade Sulphite Company, which had gone up in 1888 and employed 90 men making groundwood and sulphite pulp for newsprint out of the ponderosa on the ridge. The mill was the reason Fork Junction existed at all. Its manager was a Chicago man named Elias Court, who came out twice a year and otherwise ran things through a superintendent, Delaney, who lived in a painted house above the mill race. The mill drew from the fork and put back into the fork, and everybody downstream knew it. Below the outfall the water ran gray in the mornings, and the trout had gone somewhere else. Nobody had made anything of it. There was no state agency in 1890 that a homesteader could write to and expect an answer, and no lawyer in the county who would take a case against the only industry in it. The Renners' east boundary ran within 100 yards of the mill's hauling road. Otto had never once thought of that road as a thing that could come to him. It came on the 11th of April, in wagons. Isabel heard them first, the drag of chain and the sucking noise of a heavy load. She walked out past the shed and saw a 4-horse team hauling a dump wagon along the mill road, and then saw it turn, off the road, through the gap in their rail fence where a post had rotted out in February, and stop in the shallow draw at the bottom of their East 40. The teamster pulled the release. Grayish sludge came out of the box in a single wet slab, maybe 2 tons of it, thick as porridge and full of stringy fiber and knots of unpulped wood. It slid down the draw and settled. She was still standing there when the second wagon came. Otto came at a run from the barn with the froe still in his hand. That's fenced ground. The teamster, a young man named Vernon Sipes, did not get down. Posts out, draws the low spot. Mr. Delaney says it's waste ground either way. It's my ground. You take that up with Mr. Delaney. Sipes did get down then, and he had the decency to look at his boots while he said it. They've been hauling it into the fork all winter. County surveyor came out about the fish. Now they got to put it on land. He climbed back up. There's about 40 more loads coming. The draw drained across 11 acres of the Renners' best bottom. By June it would be under a foot of gray. Otto walked the 6 miles to the mill the next morning and was made to wait 2 hours on a bench outside the superintendent's office. Delaney was not a cruel man, and did not pretend to be. He was a man with a problem of his own. The Fork's got a fish commissioner looking at it now, he said. State law says I can't put slurry in running water. It doesn't say anything about where I put it otherwise. So it goes on the flat. On my flat. On a draw that the survey shows as an intermittent watercourse, which nobody's proved is yours. Delaney turned a pencil over. Bring me a patent, Mr. Renner. You show me a patent with your name on it, and I'll move the dumping east. Until then, you're a claimant with 18 months to go, and I've got 90 men whose wages depend on that mill running Monday. I could go to the county. You could. It'd cost you $40 to file, and another $100 to see it through, and court has a firm in Spokane on retainer. Delaney said it flatly, not as a threat, but as arithmetic. I'd rather you didn't, but I'd rather that than shut the digesters. Otto walked home the 6 miles and did not tell Isabel about the $40. By the end of April, there were 19 loads in the draw. The smell arrived with the warm weather, not rot exactly, a sour chemical stink from the sulphite liquor still in the fiber, and under it the mushroomy smell of wet wood. Rain the first week of May spread the pile out of the draw and across 4 acres of bottom that Isabel had meant for potatoes. The gray went into the soil and sat there, waterlogged, killing the volunteer grass. Otto tried 3 things. He rebuilt the fence post, heavier, with 2 braces. Sipes drove around it, through a lower gap, because the mill road ran along the property line for a 1/4 mile, and there were a dozen gaps. He tried digging a diversion trench across the head of the draw to turn the slurry south onto the basalt. The trench filled and slumped in 2 days. The material had almost no structure when it was wet. It flowed like thick paint and found every low line. He tried hauling it. He and the 2 horses moved 11 wagon loads over 9 days to a rock pile at the north end. His hands split. The mare went lame in her off-fore and stayed lame for 3 weeks, which meant no plowing, which meant the spring wheat went in 11 days late and thin. Isabel did the arithmetic in the tobacco tin. $11.40 had become $6.10, mostly liniment and a new singletree. The store debt had gone to 38. "We could go to the county," she said one evening. "With what?" "Marta says Anders has a cousin who reads law in Colfax." "No." She set down the mending. "You didn't hear the rest." "I heard enough of it." Otto was looking at his hands, which were the hands of a cooper and were not healing right. "I'm not going around this valley with a cup out. Delaney was straight with me. He's got the law on his side until we prove up, and we prove up by staying. And staying costs money we don't have to spend on lawyers. So we stay and watch it fill. So we stay." That was the shape of it in mid-May. They could sue and lose the farm to fees. They could abandon and lose the farm to the calendar. They could endure and lose the bottom land, which was, at 11 acres of the 40 broken, more than 1/4 of everything that fed them. The new information came on a hot Tuesday, the 27th. Isabel went down to the draw to see how far it had spread and found that the oldest part of the pile, the April slab that had been baking on the south face for 6 weeks, had gone hard. Not soil hard. It had dried into a mat, gray-white, maybe 2 inches thick, and when she got her fingers under an edge and pulled, it came up in a sheet the size of a wagon seat and did not crumble. The fibers had knitted. She could flex it, and it did not break. She rapped it with her knuckle, and it made a dull, dense sound, like a slate. She carried it up to the house and put it on the stump. Otto looked at it for a long time. "That's a shingle," he said. He did not say it as a decision. He said it as an observation, and then he sat on the stump next to the gray sheet and turned it over and looked at how the fiber ran, and Isabel watched him do the thing he had done all his life with staves and hoops, read a material to find out what it wanted to be. "It won't stay hard in rain," he said finally. "It's paper. Paper drinks. Then we make it not drink." "With what?" "I don't know yet." She sat down beside him. "But I know how to find out. You test a small piece, and you write down what you did. That's all my father ever did." Otto ran his thumb along the sheet's edge, where the fiber had feathered. "If it works, we'd need molds, pressing boards, something to squeeze the water out flat and even, or it'll dry cupped like green lumber. Can you build that?" "I built barrels that held brine for a year." He said it, and then heard how it sounded, and something in his face loosened for a moment. "Yes, I can build that." "Then we do this ourselves," Isabel said, "and we start tomorrow." She meant ourselves. To mean the 2 of them. Otto heard it as nobody else. Marta Vig came on the 1st of June with her long ladder in the wagon and Anders driving, because she had decided some weeks earlier that this was going to happen whether Isabel liked it or not. "We're not up for company," Isabel said. "Good, because we're not company." Marta got down. "Anders has to be at the mill Thursday. He's taking work in the finishing room." That stopped Isabel. "Anders is a farmer." Anders is a farmer with 160 acres of sagebrush and 2 years to prove up on it, and the mill pays $1.60 a day. Marta's mouth was flat. "So he'll be gone 11 hours and I'll be running a place alone, which is why I came." She looked at the gray flat below the shed. "You've got something down there you're trying to figure out. I've got hands, and nothing to do with them from June to harvest. We can't pay you." "Did I ask you for money?" Marta pulled the ladder off the wagon by herself. "Ask me for help, Isabel. Just once. Try how it sounds." Isabel did not ask, but she did not send Marta home either, and by the second week of June, the two women had a working method that neither would have arrived at alone. The first problem was mechanical, and it was Otto's. Wet slurry from the draw was roughly 9 parts water to 1 part fiber. Spread thin in the sun, it dried in 4 days into something that held together but was uneven, thick where the puddle had been deep, papery at the edges, warped and dished as it shrank. Otto measured the shrinkage with a stick and found it went to about 1/3 of its wet thickness and did not shrink evenly, which was why the sheets cupped. "Same as green oak," he said. "It dries fastest at the face, and the face pulls the back." His answer was a press, and his first press was wrong. He built it from what he had, 2 slabs of 2-inch fir, 30 inches by 24, faced smooth with the jointer plane, and a wooden screw he cut himself from a length of maple axle stock, using the same tap-and-die technique he had used to make bung augers. It took him 5 days. It was a beautiful piece of work. It squeezed the water out of the first batch in under a minute and produced a sheet that was dense, flat, and, when it dried 4 days later, cracked straight down the middle. He had pressed it too hard and too fast. The water had blown out sideways and taken the surface fiber with it, and it had left the interior compacted so tight that the shrinkage had nowhere to go. "Slower," Isabel said, writing it down. She had started a ledger in the back of the account book. June 9. Full pressure at once. Cracked at 4 days. Try in stages. The second problem was the material, and it was hers. The pulp from the draw was mill waste, which meant it was the fiber that had been rejected. Screenings, knots, shives, short broken fibers too poor for newsprint. Long fiber is what gives paper strength, because long fibers overlap and bond to each other across their length. Isabel had learned the principle from wool, not paper. A long staple fleece spun a stronger yarn than a short one, every time, and no amount of care made short wool behave like long. She could not make the mill's short fiber longer. She could add something long to it. She tried 4 things in the last 2 weeks of June, in batches the size of a pie tin, drying them on a board behind the shed. Flax straw, retted 3 weeks in a barrel until the woody core rotted off the fiber. This was a thing she had watched done in Cincinnati and had never done herself, and her first barrel went anaerobic and stank so badly Otto made her move it downwind. The second barrel worked. Chopped to 2 inches and stirred into the slurry at about 1 part in 8, it made a sheet that took nearly twice the force to break across. Horsehair from the mare's tail combings, strong, but it did not bond. It just sat in the sheet like wire in cheese and pulled out at the edges. Grass, dried and chopped, brittle, no better than the pulp, and cattail leaf from the slough at the north end, split and chopped, which worked nearly as well as flax and could be had by the wagon load for the labor of cutting it. June 24th. The ledger said, "Flax 1/8 best, Cattail 1T8, near as good and free. Hair no good, no bond. Marta's contribution was the thing that made any of it possible at scale, which was that she pointed out they were doing the hardest part backward. They had been shoveling wet slurry uphill from the draw to the shed, 400 yards, in a wheelbarrow, 200 pounds a trip. Dry it where it lies, Marta said. Then carry the dry. Dry pulp weighed a third of what wet pulp weighed. They cut drying beds into the south-facing bank above the draw, raked the slurry out 4 inches thick, and let the sun take 3/4 of the water out before anybody lifted a shovel. It cut the hauling labor by 2/3 and added 4 days to every batch. 4 days was survivable in June. It became the central constraint of everything that followed. By the 1st of July they had a process, and it was this. Rake wet slurry into a 4-inch bed on the bank. Let it dry 3 to 5 days depending on weather, until it was leathery rather than wet. Break it up, haul it to the shed in the barrow, and shred it. Otto built a shredder out of a hardwood roller studded with cut nails, cranked by hand, which worked, and which took 2 people, one to crank and one to feed. Re-wet the shredded fiber in a trough with a measured amount of water and the chopped flax or cattail. Stir it to an even mush with a paddle. Ladle it into a wooden decal box 30 by 24 by 4 inches deep, with a false bottom of slatted fir and a coarse burlap screen laid over it. Press it. And here was where the 5 days of failure had taught them something. Otto pressed in 3 stages now. A quarter turn on the screw, weight a count of 200. Another quarter turn, weight, then down slow to full, and hold it for an hour. The water came out through the slats and ran off the bench into a bucket, and the sheet came out of the box at about 3/4 of an inch thick, flat and coherent enough to lift on a board. Then it dried on racks under the shed roof, out of direct sun, for 8 to 12 days, weighted at the corners with fist-sized basalt cobbles to hold it flat while it shrank. The finished sheet was 28 by 22 inches, half an inch thick, gray, weighing about 7 pounds. Otto could break one over his knee if he tried. He could not break it by standing on it. They made 41 sheets in July and lost 14 of them to warping, cracking, or edge crumble. The remaining problem was the one Otto had named on the stump in May. Paper drinks. A sheet left out in the first real rain of the season, the 8th of August, 3/4 of an inch in 2 hours, swelled, softened, and by the next morning was a shapeless gray pad on the ground, having given up entirely. Isabel had expected this. She had been thinking about it since June, and what she had been thinking about was her father's finishing room, where the last step on an oilcloth was linseed oil cooked with litharge to make it dry hard instead of staying tacky forever. She could not buy litharge. She could buy raw linseed oil at Hallowell's for 85 cents the gallon, on the account that was now $44, and she did. The first attempt she brushed on cold, 1 coat, and it soaked in and did nothing, because the sheet was porous as a sponge, and a gallon disappeared into 6 sheets without leaving a film on any of them. The second attempt, she heated the oil over the cook fire and dipped a whole sheet in a shallow trough. That was better. The hot oil penetrated and the sheet came out heavy and dark, but it stayed tacky for 11 days and picked up every fly and grass seed in the county, and when it finally set it was still soft enough to dent with a thumb. The third attempt was on the 11th of September, and it was 2 changes at once, which Isabel wrote down as a violation of her own rule. She stirred a quantity of pine rosin into the hot oil, rosin she got by tapping the ponderosa above the house and cooking off the turpentine, which she knew about because everybody in a dyer's shop knew what varnish was made of, at roughly 1 part rosin to 4 parts oil. and she dipped the sheet hot, straight off the drying rack, while it still held some heat from the sun. It came out darker, slick, and set hard in 5 days. She left it out in the rain on the 18th. It shed water like a slate. Otto roofed the shed with it in October. He did it the way he would have done shingles, which turned out to be nearly right and not entirely. The sheets went on horizontally over the existing rafters, starting at the eave, each course overlapping the one below by 5 inches, more than he'd have used for cedar, because he did not trust it yet. He nailed through the top 4 inches only, so that the nail heads were covered by the course above, and no fastener was exposed to weather. He used 4 nails to a sheet, and he pre-drilled every hole with an awl, because the first 3 sheets he tried to nail cold split from the fastener out. That was the first lesson of installation. The material had no grain to run along, but it had no give either, and a nail driven hard cracked it. The second lesson was that a 1/2-inch sheet, 28 inches wide, would sag under its own weight if the rafters were spaced more than about 2 feet, and Otto's shed rafters were on 30-inch centers. He furred in intermediate strips of scrap fir. It cost him a day and 11 board feet, and it stopped the sag. The third lesson came from the weather itself. On a hot afternoon in mid-October, the roof ticked and popped, and Otto climbed up to find that the sheets had grown, not much, 1/8 of an inch across the width, and that where he had butted 2 sheets tight together end to end, they had pushed against each other, and one had buckled up off the rafter. He took that course off and relaid it with a 1/4-inch gap at every butt joint, covered by a 4-inch strip of the same material nailed over the seam. "It moves," he told Isabel that evening. "It drinks a little even oiled, and it swells, and then it dries and shrinks back. You can't fight it. You have to leave it room." He said it as a technical observation. Isabel wrote it in the ledger and did not say anything about the rest of it. The shed took 206 sheets and 11 weeks of work, and used, by Isabel's accounting, about 9 wagon loads of the slurry from the draw. There were by then somewhere near 200 loads down there. They had made a visible dent in nothing. But there was a roof. They were not the only ones who noticed. Vernon Sipes noticed, because he drove past twice a day, and Vernon Sipes mentioned it in the mill yard, and by the end of October, men had begun stopping on the road to look at the gray roof on the Renner shed. The first person to ask about it was not a customer. It was Marta. "My chicken house," she said. "The roof's tar paper, and it's 3 years gone. Anders is at the mill 6 days. If I can't fix it myself, it doesn't get fixed. You can have the sheets. I'll pay for them." Marta, $2. Marta had it in her hand already. "Because if you give them away to me, you'll give them away to the next one, and then you'll be a woman with a gray flat and no money, same as you were in April. $2, and I'll help make them." They roofed the chicken house on the 3rd of November, the 2 of them, in a wind that made the latter work miserable, and taught them a 4th lesson. On a low-pitch roof, wind got under a 5-inch lap and lifted it. Otto came over on the 4th and added a 5th nail at the center of the lower edge of each sheet, driven through both courses, with a lead washer cut from a scrap of pipe under the head to seal the hole. That worked. It also meant an exposed nail, which meant a hole that would leak in 10 years if nobody maintained it. "Tell them," Isabel said. "When we sell them, tell them it wants looking at every few years. Nobody wants to hear that about a roof." "Then they can buy cedar." Otto laughed. A short, surprised sound, the first one in a while. Orders came slowly, and in a shape they had not anticipated. Nobody in the Nisqually Fork country was building new. What people had were failing roofs, sod roofs that leaked mud into the soup, tar paper gone brittle, shake roofs, a decade past their life, with no money for cedar at $4 the square, and freight from Colville on top of that. So the orders were small: 6 sheets for a smokehouse, 14 for a granary, 22 for a bunkhouse at the Ammon place, which was the largest single order they took that winter, and which nearly broke them, because in December they discovered the thing that would define the whole enterprise. You cannot dry pulp in the sun in December. The drying beds were the bottleneck, and the drying beds ran on weather. From November to March, the bank above the draw was frozen half the time and sodden the rest, and the 4-day dry became a 4-week dry that often ended in a bed of slurry that had frozen, thawed, and turned to gray soup. Between the 1st of December and the 1st of March, they produced 91 sheets, and they had done 80 of them from stock that Otto had shredded and stored dry in the barn back in October. They ran out of dry stock on the 19th of February with 8 sheets owed to the Ammon bunkhouse and no way to make them until April. Otto rode out to tell Ammon and came back with a bruised look. He paid half in advance, Isabel said. He knows. He says he'll wait. Otto hung up his coat. He also says the Petersons want 30 sheets in May and Coyle wants his barn done, which is 160, and I told him yes. Isabel put down her pen. We made 91 sheets in 3 months. In winter, we made 206 for the shed in 11 weeks in summer, and that was both of us and Marta full-time, and nothing else getting done. If we take Coyle's barn, we don't put in a garden. Then we buy food. With what money? The money from the sheets, which we've been spending on linseed oil at 85 cents a gallon and nails at 4 cents a pound. She turned the ledger around. We've taken in $61 since October. We've spent $43 on materials. Hallowell's still owed $31. This isn't a business yet. It's a way of being tired. The argument was real, and neither of them won it, which was itself something new. They had not had an argument in 3 years that either of them cared enough to finish. What resolved it was that Otto went out to the barn and sat with a lamp and worked on the actual problem, which was drying. He came in at midnight with a drawing. A shed, he said. Open on the south, closed on the north. A slanted floor of slats. You lay the wet pulp on the slats in trays, and the wind goes under and over both faces at once. It's how they season staves. It won't work in a hard freeze, but it'll get us 6 weeks either side of winter, and it'll work in rain, which the beds don't. How much lumber? 400 board feet, say $14, rough sawn at the mill, plus hauling. We have $18. I know. They built it in March. It worked, more or less. The trays warped and had to be rebuilt with cross battens, and the north wall had to be extended because the wind came around it, and the first load in it took 9 days instead of 4, because March was March. But by the 15th of April, 1891, they had a drying shed, a press, a shredder, a written record of 140 tested variations, a roof that had come through a winter, and 11 customers. They also had $6, no garden in, and 160 sheets promised to a man named Coyle by the end of June. The storm came on the 9th of May, and it came out of the southwest with hail in front of it. It took the ridge above Fork Junction in about 40 minutes. It stripped the tar paper off the school, took half the shakes off Hallowell's store and dropped them in the road, collapsed a section of the Vig barn roof onto a hay wagon, and peeled the north slope of the mill's own finishing room roof back like a lid. The Renner shed lost nothing, not a sheet. The hail dimpled the oiled surface and did not go through it, and the wind found no edge to get under, because Otto had put a fifth nail through every lower edge in November after a chicken house in a wind. By the 11th of May, there were 4 wagons in the Renner yard. By the 14th, there were 11 orders on the ledger, totaling 640 sheets, which was more than they had made in the entire life of the enterprise, and Marcus Hallowell had offered to carry the linseed oil on account against delivery, and a man from the Ammon place had asked whether he could learn the process and pay for the teaching. And on the 16th, a wagon came up from the mill with Delaney in it. Delaney did not get down. He looked at the shed roof for a while, and then at the gray flat below it, which was still, after a year, very nearly as large as it had been. "You're using our tailings." "They're on my ground," Otto said. "They are." Delaney folded his hands over the reins. "Mr. Court's out from Chicago next month. He'll want to know why a homesteader 6 miles up the road is selling roofing made from material that comes off our screens. He'll ask whether we ought to be doing it. Then let him ask. I'm telling you, and I'm telling you before he does, because I'd rather you had time to think than be surprised." Delaney's voice was almost kind, which made it worse. "You've got no patent on the land, and no patent on the method. If Court decides to build a press in the mill yard, he can. He's got a boiler, 100 men, and a rail spur to Colville. You've got a screw press and a wife. He can build what he likes. He can also stop dumping in your draw." Delaney let that sit, "which I imagine would suit you fine in April of last year. How would it suit you now?" Otto did not have an answer, and Delaney did not wait for one. He turned the wagon in the yard and went back down the road. Isabel had heard it from the doorway. "He's right," she said that night. "Both ways. If they stop dumping, we run out of material in about 2 years at the rate we use it. If they start making it themselves, we're finished in 1. So we make sheets faster. We make sheets faster, and then what? Otto, if he builds a press with a steam ram, he presses 40 sheets an hour. We do 6 a day. Then we go to the county and file on the method." He said it, and immediately looked as if he'd bitten something. "A patent. That's a lawyer. I know it's a lawyer." The lawyer, when Isabel finally wrote to him, a man named Ackerley in Spokane, whose name Anders Vig's cousin had supplied a year earlier through Marta, which Otto did not comment on, replied in 11 days that a United States patent would run to something over $200 in fees and drawings, and would take 18 months to 2 years, and that in his opinion the process as described was likely too close to existing art in fiber roofing to survive examination. There were, he wrote, several patented processes for oiled and saturated felt roofing already in commerce east of the Mississippi. That letter arrived on the 2nd of June, and it did 2 things. It ended the patent question, and it told Isabel, for the first time, that other people had been making roofing out of fiber and oil for years, and that the Renners had spent 13 months rediscovering the outline of something that was already in the world. She sat with that for an afternoon, and then found she did not mind it as much as she expected. What Ackerley's letter described was felt, rag felt, saturated in tar or asphalt, made in factories, shipped by rail, sold in rolls. Nobody was shipping it to the Nisqually Fork at a price a man with a granary could pay, and nobody was making it out of the 90 tons of ruined bottom land, sitting 100 yards from her kitchen. "We're not competing with a factory in Ohio," she told Otto. "We're competing with cedar at $4 the square with freight on it. For now, for as long as we're the only ones here." June went badly, and it went badly because they took the work. 640 sheets meant roughly 110 days of production at their best rate, and Coyle's 160 were promised by the end of the month. Otto hired 2 men, This was the first money the enterprise had spent on labor, and Otto had resisted it for 3 weeks, and he did it in the end, not because he changed his mind, but because the arithmetic beat him. The men were Vernon Sipes, who had quit the mill in a dispute over hours, and a young Norwegian named Halvor Bakke. Otto paid them $1.40 a day, 20 cents under the mill wage, and told them it was that or nothing. He also did not train them properly, because training took time he did not have. He showed them the press and the count: quarter turn 200, quarter turn 200, down slow, hold an hour, and then he went to work on the drying shed extension and left them to it, and they made 90 sheets in 6 days, which was 3 times the old rate, and which delighted him. 41 of those 90 cracked in drying. They had been shortening the count, not out of laziness. Sipes had reasoned, sensibly, that if the water was out at 140, there was no sense standing there to 200. He was wrong for a reason nobody had told him. The count was not about getting the water out, it was about giving the fiber time to slide and resettle under load, instead of being crushed in place. Otto found out on the 22nd, when the first of the batch came off the racks. He did not handle it well. "You cost me 41 sheets," he said, in the yard, in front of Baki and Marta and Isabel. "That's $20 of oil and 11 days. Sipes went red. "You told me the count. You never told me the—" "Why?" "You should have done what I said. Then say it and stand there while I do it." Sipes untied his apron. "I quit the mill because a man wouldn't tell me why. I'm not doing it twice." He was gone by noon. Bakke stayed, but he stopped asking questions, which was worse. They delivered 94 sheets to Coyle on the 30th instead of 160. Coyle was decent about it and took the 94 and said he'd wait, and word went around the valley in the particular way it does that the Renners had missed an order. And on the 5th of July, Marta Vig came to the yard and stood in front of Otto with her hands on her hips. "You need 4 people, and you have 2.5, she said. "I'm here 5 days a week from now, and Anders has 3 men in the finishing room who want off the night shift and would take $1.50. I can't pay 5 people. You can't pay them out of $6. You can pay them out of 640 sheets at $1.10 apiece, which is $700, which is more money than either of you has seen since Ohio." Marta did not raise her voice. "Ask me to organize it. Ask Anders to find you the men. Say the words, Otto." Otto looked at the ground for a long moment. "We'll manage," he said. Marta got back in her wagon. "Isabel," she said, "when he's done managing, you know where I live." And she drove out, and Isabel stood in the yard and did not go after her, because 13 months of doing a thing alone had taught her that it was easier to lose a friend than to admit she needed one. Elias Court arrived from Chicago on the 14th of July and came out to the Renner place 3 days later in a hired buggy, alone, wearing a linen suit and good boots that he did not mind ruining in the gray flat. He spent 40 minutes down in the draw. He picked up dried pulp and crumbled it. He climbed the ladder, unasked, at 50-odd years old, and walked the shed roof and got down on one knee at a butt joint to look at how the cover strip was nailed. Then he sat on the stump and asked good questions for an hour. What was the lap? What was in the oil? What did a sheet weigh? How many nails? What happened in a freeze? What happened in a fire? And Isabel had to say honestly that she did not know, that they had never tested it, and that oiled fiber was certainly not going to be as good as tin. Court wrote it all in a small notebook. "I'll be direct with you," he said. Cascade Sulfite loses money on the screenings. We pay Sipes and 2 other men and 4 horses to haul them somewhere, and now that the fish commissioner has an opinion, the somewhere is getting expensive. You've turned our cost into your stock. I admire it. You want to buy it, Otto said. I want to invest in it. There's a difference. Court turned a page. Here's what I'd propose. The mill puts up a building in the yard. We have steam, so you dry with waste heat off the digesters instead of the sun, which solves your winter entirely. We put in a hydraulic ram. You come on as superintendent of the department at $120 a month, and Mrs. Renner as, I don't know what we'd call it, she'd run the recipe. Say $80. $200 a month. Isabel did the arithmetic without meaning to. It was more in 1 month than they had earned from the land in 5 years. And the process, she said, belongs to the company. That's the shape of the thing, ma'am. I won't pretend otherwise. And the homestead? You'd want to keep living out here to prove up, I imagine. It's 6 miles. Men walk it. Otto said, no. He said it fast, and Isabel heard exactly why he said it, and it was not the reason he would have given. Court did not seem offended. He put the notebook away. Think it over a fortnight. I'll be at the mill until the 1st. He got into the buggy. One thing I'll say without charge. You're making a roof for people who can't afford a roof, which is a decent business, and a small one. If you want it to stay small, that's a legitimate choice. But you can't stay small and fill 600 sheets of orders, Mr. Renner. Those are 2 different lives, and you're presently trying to live both. He drove out. Otto stood in the yard. $120 a month, Isabel said. It's ours. Is it? Ackerley says half of it is already patented in Ohio. The doing of it is ours. Otto's voice cracked on it. 13 months. Your ledger. My press. That's not a thing you sell for a wage, Isabel. That's, if I take his money, I'm a hand in his yard. Same as I'd have been if I'd gone down there in '88 and never broke this ground at all. And if we don't take it, then we make the sheets. With who? Otto did not answer. Which was the answer. The next 5 weeks were the hardest work of either of their lives, and it was not enough. Otto and Bakke and Isabel produced, between the 18th of July and the 24th of August, 312 sheets. They filled Coyle's Balance and the Petersons, and 4 smaller orders. They did not fill the Ammon edition, the Fork Junction schoolhouse, which the district had voted on in June, 90 sheets, the first public order they'd ever taken, or 3 others. Otto worked from 4 in the morning. He pressed, he dipped, he hauled, he installed on Sundays because the customers wanted installation and would pay another 30 cents a sheet for it, and he would not turn down 30 cents a sheet. On the 9th of August he fell off the Peterson barn. It was 10 feet, into soft ground, and it was because he had been on the ladder since dawn, and his hands, the cooper's hands that had never fully healed from the hauling in the spring of 1890, had cramped closed on the rail. He broke 2 ribs and cracked the small bone in his left forearm. Doc Winslow in Fork Junction set the arm in a splint and told him 6 weeks. Otto was back at the press on the 12th, working one-handed, with Isabel turning the screw. The production rate fell by half. The rosin cook was Isabel's job, and the pressing was Otto's, and the shredding took 2 hands, and Bakke, who was 22 and strong and willing, still did not know why the count was 200 and had stopped asking. The oil ran out on the 21st. Hallowell had carried them to $90 and would not go past 100, and said so with real regret, because he had a note of his own at the bank in Colville and a bad August. Isabel wrote to Marta on the 22nd and tore it up. On the 26th, the schoolhouse committee canceled. They had waited 11 weeks, and the term started in 3, and they bought cedar shakes freighted in from Colville at a price the district could barely stand, and 2 of the 3 committeemen made a point of saying it was a shame, and one of them said it in Hallowell's store in front of 6 people. On the 29th, Ammon canceled and asked for his advance back, $22. Isabel paid it out of the tobacco tin, and the tin had $4 left in it. And on the 2nd of September, Otto rode down to the mill to ask Delaney whether the dumping would continue through the winter, because their stock of raw slurry in the draw had a bottom now, and he needed to know. He came back at dusk and sat down on the stump and did not go into the house. Isabel came out. "They've built it," he said. "Built what?" "A press. In the yard, by the screen room. Steam ran off the number 2 boiler." He was looking at the shed roof. Court didn't wait the fortnight. He never was waiting. Delaney says they ran their first sheets on Tuesday. They're bad. They crack, they don't know the count, and they don't know about the rosin, but there's 40 men in that yard and a boiler, and they'll figure it out by Christmas. Isabel sat down on the ground beside the stump because her legs had stopped agreeing to hold her. "He offered you $120 a month. I know what he offered, and you said no because you'd rather be a man who did it alone." She was not shouting. That was somehow worse. "Otto, we are going to lose this. Not to him, to you." He did not defend himself. That was the first thing all summer that frightened her. The rain came early that year, on the 11th of September, and it came for 9 days. The drying shed held. The press was under cover. The finished stock, 61 sheets, all they had left, all of it already sold and paid for and not yet delivered, was stacked on the racks under the shed roof, weighted flat with basalt cobbles, exactly as it had been stacked for 15 months. What Otto had not accounted for was that he had extended the drying shed in June by 12 feet on the downhill side, and that the extension's roofline dumped its runoff into a corner that had previously been open ground. 9 days of rain put 4 inches of standing water across the low end of the shed floor. The bottom 11 sheets of every stack stood in it. Fiber and oil is a good roof, because water runs off it. It is a poor thing to stand in water, because the cut edges are raw and drink from the side. They found it on the 20th. The bottom sheets had swelled, delaminated at the edges, and taken the weight of the stacks above them until the stacks had gone over. 53 of the 61 were destroyed. The other 8 were the only product the Renner place had left, and every one of them was already owed to somebody else. Otto did not speak for 2 days. He walked the gray flat on the 21st with his arm in the splint and counted what was left of the raw material, and it was perhaps 30 loads, a year's work at the rate they could actually manage, and he understood while he was doing the counting that the counting was a way of not thinking. On the evening of the 22nd, he sat on the stump and made himself think. It was not the rain. The rain was weather, and weather was always going to come. It was that he had built the extension alone, in June, at night, exhausted, and had not walked the finished thing in a downpour, and had not asked anybody to look at it, because asking anybody to look at his work was the one thing he had never in his life been able to do. It was the same reason Sipes had left. He had given the man an order and not a reason, because a reason was a conversation, and a conversation was 2 people, and Otto Renner had decided at 19 years old, watching his father apologize to a brother-in-law about money, that a man who needed 2 people was a man who had already lost. His father had died ashamed of a debt. Otto was about to lose a farm to avoid one, which was not the same thing at all, and he saw for the first time that it was not the same thing. Isabel came out with a lamp and sat on the ground. I've been going through the ledger, she said. 14 months. 141 entries. Every one of them is a thing we learned by ruining something. She set the lamp down. Court can build a press in a week. He can't buy the ledger, and he doesn't know it exists. Bach has been here 14 months, and he doesn't know it exists either, because we never told him anything but the count. I know. That's the whole of it, isn't it? We've got the only thing that matters, and we've been keeping it in a drawer. Otto looked at the shed roof, gray in the lamplight, 15 months old and perfect. Marta asked me to say the words, he said. In July, she stood right there. She did. I thought if I said them, I'd be my father. Isabel waited. I'd be a man with people, Otto said slowly, as though testing whether the sentence would hold weight. That's all it is. A man with people. He put his good hand flat on the stump. I need help, he said. Isabel, I don't know how to do this, and I need help. She took his hand. The plan they built over the next 4 days was not a way to beat the mill. It was a way to make beating them irrelevant. Court had steam, a ram, and 40 men. He did not have 15 months of failures. He did not know that the count was about fiber settling under load rather than water leaving. He did not know that a butt joint needed a 1/4-inch gap. He did not know 1 part rosin to 4 parts oil, or that the sheet had to be dipped warm, or that the flax had to be retted 3 weeks and no more, or the 60-odd other things written in Isabel's account book in her small, tight hand. He would learn them. It would take him 2 years and a great deal of ruined stock. Or the Renners could give them away. Not to Court, to the Valley, to Marta, to Baki, to Sipes if he would come back, to Anders's men, to anybody who would learn the process properly and make sheets under a common name and a common standard. They would sell the knowledge instead of hoarding it. And they would have to ask. Isabel went to the Vig place on the 27th of September and walked into the kitchen and did not sit down. I need help, she said. I'm asking. I don't know how to say it better than that. Marta put down the bowl she was holding. That's how you say it, she said. The first meeting was on the 2nd of October in the Vig barn, under the section of roof that had come down in May and been patched with Renner sheets in June. 11 people came. Marta had gotten word to them because Marta knew everybody, which was a resource the Renners had possessed for 6 years and never once used. Anders Vig came, off shift. Halvor Bake came. Vernon Sipes came and stood at the back with his hat in his hands and his jaw set. Coyle came, and Peterson, and 2 of the finishing room men Anders had mentioned in July, and Marcus Hallowell came because he was owed $90 and wanted to see what he was owed it against. Otto stood up with his arm still splinted and did the hardest thing he had done in his life, which was to explain, in front of people, everything he had gotten wrong. He told them about the first press and the cracked sheet. He told them about the horsehair. He told them about the butt joints buckling in the October heat, and the chicken house lifting in the wind, and the 5th nail with the lead washer, and that the washer meant a hole that would need looking at in 10 years, and that they would have to tell customers so. He told them about the schoolhouse. Then Isabel opened the account book. This is 14 months of failures, she said. 141 of them. I'm going to read them out, and any of you who wants to write them down should write them down, and then they're yours. Sipes said from the back, Why? Because Cascade Sulfite ran their first sheets on the 1st of September, and they don't know any of it, Isabel said. They'll know it by Christmas of next year. Between now and then, either 11 people in this valley know how to make a good roof, or nobody does, and then 1 company does. And what do you get? Otto answered that one. $1 a sheet on every sheet any of you makes for the first year, he said. After that, nothing. It's written down, and Hallowell will hold the paper. If you don't want to sign it, sit down anyway and take the notes for free, because I'd rather you made a good roof than no roof. 9 of the 11 signed. Sipes signed last and said, when he handed the paper back, "You going to tell me why it's 200? Because the fiber has to slide," Otto said. "You crush it fast, it's got nowhere to go and it cracks when it shrinks. You give it time under the load, it settles and it stays settled. That's the whole reason, and I should have told you in June." Sipes put his hat on. "All right," he said. What they built that winter was not a factory. It was an arrangement, and it was held together mostly by Marta, who turned out to have an organizational mind that had been going to waste on 160 acres of sagebrush for 11 years. The raw material stayed on the Renner ground because the draw was where the mill had put it, and there were still perhaps 30 loads. The Renners sold it at 15 cents the wagon load, which was not a price anybody would fight over, and which made the sale a fact rather than a favor. Pressing happened in 4 places: the Renner shed, the Vig barn, Coyle's granary, and a lean-to Sipes and Bakke put up together on the Bakke place. Each press was built by its owner to Otto's drawing, and Otto walked each one before it was used and made corrections. And this was the part that would have been impossible for him a year earlier, because it meant standing in another man's barn and saying, "Your screw is off-center by a half-inch, and it will press cupped," and then staying to help fix it. Isabel ran the recipe. She cooked rosin into oil in 15-gallon lots on the Renner place and sold it out at a fixed price, which meant every sheet in the valley had the same finish, which meant that when one leaked, they could find out why. And they set a standard, which was Hallowell's idea and the most commercially useful thing anybody contributed. Every sheet that met it got a mark, a simple pressed impression from a shaped block in the bottom of the decal box, 3 parallel bars, and Hallowell agreed to stock and warrant marked sheets at his store and would not touch unmarked ones. A sheet was marked if it was half an inch, 28 by 22, made with 1 part long fiber to 8, pressed to the count, and dipped in Renner oil. Cascade Sulfite ran sheets through the winter of 1891 and into the spring of 1892 and sold them at 70 cents, which was 30 cents under the valley price. They cracked. Not all of them. Enough. Court's men were pressing on a hydraulic ram in 11 seconds because a ram that can do it in 11 seconds is a ram you paid for, and they were drying with waste heat in 2 days because that was the whole advantage of waste heat, and both of those things did to the fiber exactly what Otto's first beautiful press had done to it in June of 1890. Elias Court came back out to the Renner place on the 19th of May, 1892, in the same hired buggy, and this time Otto asked him to sit down. "I've got 400 sheets in a yard that I can't sell," Court said. "Hallowell won't stock them. He tells me they haven't got the mark. What in God's name is the mark?" "A standard," Isabel said. 9 households hold it. 9 households. 10, since March. Court took out the small notebook. He looked at it for a while, and then put it away again without opening it. "You could have sold me the count for 120 a month," he said. "I could have. Instead, you gave it to a valley for $1 a sheet on a 1-year term that must be nearly expired." "It expires in October," Otto said. Court laughed. A short, unamused, entirely genuine laugh. "Then what stops any of them from cutting you out in November?" "Nothing," Otto said, "except that I walk every press before it runs, and I'm the only one who's read the whole ledger, and when Bakke had a batch delaminate in March, I was in his barn the next morning. That's not a contract. It's just being useful to people." The complication came 3 weeks later, and it came from the direction they had stopped watching. On the 8th of June, 1892, Delaney sent word that the Fish Commissioner's inquiry had concluded and that Cascade Sulphite was under order to construct settling ponds, and that consequently the mill would cease hauling screenings entirely as of the 1st of August. Everything would go into the ponds. The draw had, by Otto's count, 4 loads left in it. It was the thing Delaney had warned him about on a wagon seat 13 months earlier, and it arrived exactly as promised, and it did not care at all about the mark or the ledger or the 9 households. There were, by then, 61 buildings in the Nisqually Fork country roofed in Renner sheet. Every one of them would need repair material eventually. There were orders on the books for 400 more sheets, and in 8 weeks there would be no fiber. Otto rode to the mill on the 11th and asked to see Court, and it was the hardest ride of the whole affair because he knew exactly what he was going to have to do. He was going to have to ask. "The screenings," he said, "after the ponds are in. What happens to them? They settle out, and we dredge them and put them in the pond spoil, which we'll have to haul somewhere anyway, and it'll be wetter than what Sipes was dumping in your draw, and it'll cost me more. Sell it to me." Court leaned back. "You want to buy the thing I've been paying to get rid of? I want a contract for it. 5 years. Wet, at the pond. We do our own hauling and our own drying." Otto put his hands flat on the desk, and they were steady. "You're going to have that cost forever. I'll take it off you at a price that's less than what the hauling costs you and more than nothing, and you'll have a line on your ledger that's black instead of red. And I get 11 cents a hundredweight and no more sheets in your yard." Court was quiet for a while. "You know I could refuse and starve you out in 8 weeks. You could." Otto did not look away. "And in 9 weeks you'd have a valley of 61 buildings with a roof nobody can repair, and every one of those people trades at Fork Junction, and half of them have got a son or a husband in your finishing room. That's not a threat, Mr. Court. I'm not in a position to threaten anybody. It's just what would happen." Court got up and went to the window and looked down at the yard where the 400 cracked sheets were still stacked. 12 cents. He said. 12 cents, and you take those 400 sheets down to the school and give them to the district for nothing, and I'll go down with Sipes and Bakke and we'll sort them and lay the sound ones, and there'll be a roof on that building before September. Why in hell would I do that? Because they canceled on us last August and bought cedar they couldn't afford, and it's the only debt in this valley I haven't paid. They signed on the 20th of June, 1892. 5 years, 12 cents the hundredweight. Renner hauling from the pond. The pond spoil turned out to be wetter and finer than the old screenings, which meant it dried slower and needed more long fiber to hold together, which meant a winter of new testing, 3 ruined batches, and a revision to the standard in February 1893, raising the long fiber ratio to 1 part in 6 for pond stock. Isabel wrote it in the ledger as entry 178. She read it out to 14 people in the Vig barn on a Sunday in March, and 11 of them wrote it down. Otto filed final proof on the homestead on the 4th of November, 1892, and received the patent the following spring. He paid Hallowell the $90 in September and the last of the 32 from 1889 with it, which Hallowell had carried for 4 years without once mentioning. They never got rich. In the best year, 1895, the Renner place cleared about $400, which was a living and not a fortune, and Marta Vig's operation cleared nearly as much, and Sipes's more, because Sipes was better at selling than any of them. In October of 1896, the shed roof needed its first real attention. 6 sheets on the north slope where the lead washers had gone slack, and one butt joint that had opened up wider than the cover strip. Otto was 40, and his hands were worse in the cold. He got the ladder up and then stood at the bottom of it for a moment, looking up. Then he walked out to the yard and rang the triangle twice, which was the signal Marta had established years back, and which meant, "Come if you can." Sipes came from the Baque place with the long ladder. Marta came with a bucket of oil. Baque's boy Emile, who was 15 and had been making sheets since he was 11, came with the nail bag and did most of the climbing, because Otto's hands were what they were and everybody knew it, and nobody made a thing of it. Isabel stayed on the ground and passed sheets up and kept the count. It took a morning. Marta stayed for dinner afterward, and Sipes stayed, and Emile ate enough for 3, and at some point Otto looked down the table at 7 people in a kitchen that had held 2 of them for 5 silent years. "Thank you for coming," he said. "You asked," Marta said.